Under the Queen's reign, the monarch has started paying income tax for the first time. She's heralded in the age of social media to the monarchy, which was very much her doing. There have been leaps and strides in the monarchy under her watch.
No one heard her. No one was supposed to. But now we know. A royal lip reader has finally decoded Queen Elizabeth's private words, spoken in a moment the cameras tried to hide. And what she said? It wasn't scripted. It wasn't royal. It was raw. This changes everything. A lip reader studying the footage afterward picked it up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be heard. But it was there. A brief moment when the Queen, always so private, let a thought slip through. What she said was simple. I did my best. But they never saw. 6 words. That's it. But somehow, it felt like more than a quiet comment. It felt like a glimpse into everything she had carried for decades. We're used to the idea that the Queen didn't speak her mind much, at least not in public. She wasn't one for interviews or candid moments. She didn't do tell-alls or press tours. Most people had never even heard her speak outside official events. That was just the way it was with her. Duty first, always composed. So when something like this surfaces, something unguarded, it makes you pause. Because for all the public appearances and formal speeches, Queen Elizabeth was still a human being. And like anyone else, she must have had moments of doubt, moments of frustration, moments where she wondered if anyone really understood what she gave up to carry that crown. That's why this moment, small as it was, caught people's attention. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It didn't need to be. It just felt real. And it makes you think about how much of her life she spent trying to do the right thing, holding it together through wars, political shifts, family dramas, scandals, and the constant pressure to be perfect. She never walked away, never cracked, always stayed the course. But maybe that quiet sentence was her way of admitting that not everything landed the way she hoped, that despite all her effort, all the stability she brought, she still felt misunderstood at times, or maybe underappreciated. It's hard to say exactly who she meant by they, the public, her family, the institution, maybe all of them, or maybe none of them. Maybe it was just an honest thought that slipped out in a quiet moment. Either way, it reminded people that even the most composed, respected leaders carry silent weight, and even someone as dignified as the Queen might wish, in a quiet moment, that someone had really seen what she was trying to do. It didn't cause a scandal, it didn't shake the monarchy, but it gave people a reason to stop and reflect, and maybe, for just a moment, see her not as the Queen, but as a person. For most of her life, Queen Elizabeth II stayed firmly within the lines of royal tradition. She rarely gave interviews. She didn't share personal opinions in public. And when she did speak, it was usually during official addresses, carefully worded and thought through. That's what people came to expect of her. Someone steady, composed, private. But every so often, something real slipped through. A glance, a sentence, a little spark of emotion. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it stuck with people. There was the time in 2007 during a photo shoot with photographer Annie Leibovitz. The Queen was dressed in her full ceremonial robes, including her crown. It was meant to be formal, respectful, nothing too unexpected. But then Leibovitz suggested she remove the crown for a more relaxed photo, and the Queen wasn't having it. She looked straight at her, pointed to the robes, and said something like, "Why would I take off the crown when I'm dressed like this?" And as she walked away, she added, "I've had enough of this." It wasn't rude, just blunt. It caught people off guard, mostly because we weren't used to hearing her speak like that. Later, a media preview made it look like she stormed out of the room, which wasn't true. The footage had been edited out of order. The network eventually apologized, but by then, the moment had already left its mark. For once, we saw her not as the Queen on a stamp, but as a woman just tired of being told what to do in her own palace. And that wasn't the only time. Back in 2002, during a public event, the Queen had to ask photographers to step back. They were getting too close to where she was sitting. She didn't yell. She didn't lose her temper. She just asked them, clearly and firmly, to give her space, a reminder that even the most composed people have boundaries. One of the more talked about moments happened all the way back in 1954. during a royal tour in Australia. There was a private argument between her and Prince Philip inside a cottage, one that apparently got heated enough for a camera crew to witness Philip walking out in frustration. The Queen, they say, called him back. The public never saw the footage, but the story made its way into royal biographies later. It wasn't gossip, it was just a reminder that they were, in fact, a couple like any other, with good days, rough days, and everything in between. And then, much later in life, came the lighter, more personal moments, like during her 90th birthday celebration in 2016. While standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, she leaned over to Prince William, who had crouched to talk to his son, Prince George, and quietly told him to stand up. It was such a small thing, a nudge from a grandmother who still valued how things looked in public. It went viral almost instantly, but what people really noticed was how gentle it was. Not a scold, just a reminder. These moments weren't meant to be public, but when they slipped through, they made people feel a little closer to her. They reminded us that behind all the ceremony and duty was a woman who got tired, who got annoyed, who laughed, and who sometimes just wanted things done a certain way. In a life spent holding back emotions and keeping things private, these moments, brief as they were, felt honest. And sometimes, honesty says more than any official speech ever could. For someone so public, Queen Elizabeth was surprisingly consistent behind closed doors. People who worked closely with her often described her as calm, polite, and very particular, especially when it came to food. Darren McGrady, one of the royal chefs who served in Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, and Balmoral, spent more than a decade cooking for the Queen. And while he cooked for presidents and prime ministers, it was the Queen's attention to detail that stuck with him most. Every meal was planned, every dish approved. The kitchen team would submit daily menus listing everything from breakfast to dinner. If the chefs wanted to try something new, even just a twist on a traditional recipe, they had to send the idea up for her approval first. There was no guessing, no winging it. This was the royal kitchen, and even the smallest deviation could be noticed. One summer, McGrady thought he'd try something seasonal. He added a light dessert to the menu, a dish called Veiled Farmer's Daughters. It was simple: layers of stewed fruits, cinnamon crumble, and whipped cream. Seemed perfect for Balmoral's countryside setting, but in his enthusiasm, he forgot to include the recipe with the menu. The next day, a handwritten note came back from the Queen. It wasn't angry, just one short question scribbled in her famously neat but slightly rushed handwriting. Who are the veiled farmer's daughters? That was it. A question with a touch of dry humor maybe, but also a quiet reminder that routines mattered. McGrady admitted later that it was one of the few times he'd truly annoyed her. She liked things done a certain way, and if the recipe wasn't included, it meant it hadn't been properly approved. He quickly sent it along, and thankfully, she liked the dessert. It even became a regular treat on warm days. But he never forgot the lesson. In her world, nothing was too small to matter, and food wasn't the only thing she had opinions on. Garlic, for instance, was completely banned from palace meals. She didn't like the lingering smell, especially when she had to greet guests up close. The chefs all knew this rule by heart, no exceptions. Her favorite meals weren't extravagant either. One of her top dishes was Dover sole with spinach and courgettes. Simple, healthy, elegant. The kind of food that didn't try to show off, just like her. That kind of order, the idea that everything had its place, was something that guided a lot of her personal life, not just the menu. McGrady said the Queen didn't shout or scold. She expected professionalism, yes, but there was a calm to it. She led by example. If something was off, she'd point it out, but always quietly, with precision. To outsiders, these food stories might sound like quirks, but to the people who worked with her, they were more than that. They were a glimpse into how the Queen saw the world. Organized, thoughtful, deliberate. It wasn't about being strict. It was about being prepared. And when your life is scheduled down to the minute, with hundreds of people relying on you, a little bit of order becomes everything. When The Crown premiered on Netflix, it quickly became one of the most talked about shows around the world. Viewers were drawn in by the dramatic storytelling, lavish costumes, and the behind-the-scenes look at royal life. For many, it was the closest they'd ever get to understanding what it might be like to live inside the palace. But for Queen Elizabeth II, it wasn't just a TV show, it was her life turned into a script. At first, the Queen didn't seem bothered. According to some reports, it was actually Prince Edward and his wife Sophie who first introduced the crown to her. They brought DVDs to Windsor Castle and, during some quiet evenings, watched episodes with her. The early seasons, it seemed, struck a decent balance. They were dramatized, sure, but respectful. They told the story of a young queen stepping into power with care and curiosity. And for a while, she was reportedly okay with it. But as more seasons were released, the tone changed. The drama grew heavier. The personal details got more pointed. The lines between fact and fiction began to blur. One particular episode in Season 2 stood out, and not in a good way. It focused on young Prince Charles and his difficult time at Gordonstoun, a boarding school in Scotland. The show portrayed Charles as lonely, bullied, and deeply unhappy. His father, Prince Philip, was shown as cold and dismissive, pushing him to be tougher. In one emotional scene, Philip calls Charles weak, a moment that stuck with many viewers. For the audience, it was gripping television. For Queen Elizabeth, it cut deeply. People close to her said she was genuinely hurt, not just because of how Charles was shown, but because of how Prince Philip came across. In real life, Philip wasn't perfect, but he was a committed, hands-on father in his own way. He had strong opinions, sure, but he cared. Seeing him reduced to a cold character didn't feel fair. And for someone like the Queen, who had spent her entire life protecting her family's image, it felt like a betrayal. To be clear, she never made a public complaint. That wasn't her style. But those in the know said the Queen had real concerns. She worried that millions of people around the world would take the show as fact. And the more personal the show got, especially with later seasons touching on Diana, family tensions, and more recent history, the more uncomfortable it became for the palace. It wasn't just that people were watching a show, it was that they were forming opinions about real people, based on scripts written for drama, not accuracy. A former staff member once said that Queen Elizabeth understood why the crown was so popular. She knew the public had always been fascinated by the royal family, but she also believed that some things should remain private. Family struggles, especially, weren't meant for global audiences. Still, she never lashed out. She didn't demand edits or issue statements. She kept doing what she always did, leading with quiet consistency. And in some ways, that made her feelings even clearer, because silence, when chosen deliberately, says a lot. Over time, the crown became more than entertainment. It shaped the way people viewed the monarchy, especially younger generations who didn't grow up watching the Queen's real-life reign. And while the show never claimed to be a documentary, many viewers treated it like one. That blurred line made things harder, not just for the Queen, but for her entire family. In private, it stung, but in public, she stayed the course. Because for Queen Elizabeth, the best response was always grace. Royal weddings have always been grand affairs. Big churches, trumpets, a sea of cameras, and millions watching from home. But for Queen Elizabeth II, they weren't just national events. They were personal. Behind the formal smiles and waves, she carried quiet emotions that few people ever saw. These moments often brought back memories of her own wedding in 1947 to Prince Philip. It had been a joyful, historic day, but also one filled with pressure. She knew what it meant to tie a personal love story to the weight of royal tradition. So every time another royal wedding took place, especially those of her children and grandchildren, she likely felt more than she let on. One of the most famous weddings in royal history happened in 1981. Lady Diana Spencer married Prince Charles in what looked like a fairy tale. The dress, the carriage ride, the balcony wave. It was all picture perfect. But the Queen, standing near the couple on that Buckingham Palace balcony, reportedly shared a few soft words with Diana. No microphones picked it up, and no one knows exactly what she said. But those close to the family said the Queen had gently acknowledged that this would not be an easy journey. Maybe it was motherly instinct. Maybe she already sensed the tension beneath the surface. Years later, in 2005, Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles. It was a very different kind of wedding. Smaller, less formal, held as a civil ceremony. Queen Elizabeth didn't attend the wedding itself, which sparked rumors of disapproval. But those who understood the details knew the truth was more complex. As the head of the Church of England, the Queen followed strict church rules that made it difficult to openly support remarriage after divorce. It wasn't about personal feelings, it was about duty. Still, she didn't distance herself. She attended the blessing ceremony afterward and hosted a reception at Windsor Castle. In a rare moment of humor, she compared the couple's long relationship to a steeplechase, an obstacle-filled horse race that, despite its challenges, ends with a finish line. It was a small but meaningful gesture, her way of saying, "I'm here. I support you." Then came Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding in 2011. It felt like a fresh start for the royal family, modern yet respectful of tradition. Kate was calm, poised, and kind. Not born into royalty, but graceful in every step she took. The public adored her, and the Queen seemed to genuinely welcome her in. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was beautiful. Over 2,000 guests with crowds outside, waving flags and cheering. Kate's gown, simple, elegant, and timeless, set a new standard. But one small moment stood out. A lip reader later claimed that the Queen leaned over to Prince Philip during the wedding and quietly mentioned that she would have preferred a different carriage, the glass coach, the same one she had used for her own wedding decades earlier. It wasn't a criticism, it was more like a wistful memory, a nod to her past, to the traditions that meant so much to her, and maybe also a reminder that every royal moment, no matter how modern, still carries echoes of those that came before. Through all these weddings, Queen Elizabeth remained steady. She smiled, supported, and gave quiet strength. She never made things about herself, but those who watched closely could often sense her heart just below the surface. For her, these ceremonies weren't just about dresses and titles, they were about family, about continuity, about the hope that each new generation would learn from the past and carry it forward with care. That's what she protected every time she stood on a palace balcony, every time she whispered something meaningful in a church pew, and every time the cameras captured her watching history unfold. Behind all the pageantry, the Queen was simply a grandmother, a mother, and a woman who understood just how hard and how beautiful royal life could be. When Prince Harry married Meghan Markle in 2018, it wasn't just a royal wedding, it was a moment that carried enormous expectations and attention. Meghan, an American actress and a divorced woman of mixed race, brought something entirely new to the monarchy. Her relationship with Harry promised change, and for a while, it looked like a fresh chapter in royal history. Queen Elizabeth welcomed Meghan warmly in the beginning. Meghan was invited to spend Christmas at Sandringham with the royal family, something traditionally reserved for spouses. She joined the Queen for joint appearances, smiling beside her during public events. On the surface, everything looked positive, but behind the palace walls, it was more complicated. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, tensions started to rise. The first sign came when Meghan chose her wedding dress. It was elegant, beautiful, and bright white, a striking choice for a second marriage. Traditionally, royal brides in their second marriages opt for off-white or cream. Queen Elizabeth, always sensitive to symbolism and subtle messages, reportedly found the choice unusual. She didn't say anything publicly, but those close to her said she quietly wondered why Meghan had picked such a traditional bridal white. Then there was the matter of the tiara. Meghan had hoped to wear a specific tiara from the royal collection, but access to the crown jewels is tightly controlled. Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal advisor and dresser, managed the approval process. Rumors swirled that Meghan was unhappy with the decision, and that her disagreement with Angela reached the Queen. For someone who deeply valued respect, especially toward loyal staff, this reportedly didn't sit well with Her Majesty. And just days before the wedding, another challenge surfaced. Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, became the center of a tabloid scandal. He had been caught staging photos for the press and then said he couldn't attend the wedding due to health issues. The Queen, concerned about the family drama playing out in public, reportedly encouraged Meghan to reconcile with her father privately. But the relationship was already strained, and the damage was done. Even Prince Harry, hoping to wear his military uniform with a beard, something against standard royal protocol, needed the Queen's approval. She granted it, quietly bending the rules for him. It was a subtle act of love, but it showed how carefully she navigated these moments. On the wedding day itself, Queen Elizabeth appeared as poised as ever. She wore a spring green coat and hat and smiled for the cameras. But some royal watchers noticed occasional moments of seriousness in her expression. Brief glimpses of someone carrying the weight of a family, trying to hold itself together under enormous pressure. Those close to the Queen later said that while she supported Harry and Meghan's marriage, she was growing weary of the tension that seemed to follow them. She had weathered decades of royal challenges, but the constant media speculation, internal disagreements, and public misunderstandings had taken their toll. What made this wedding different was that the Queen wasn't just balancing duty and ceremony, she was navigating a fragile family dynamic, all under the world's microscope. And as much as she tried to keep everything running smoothly, it was clear even she couldn't control every element. Still, she never showed frustration in public. There were no pointed statements, no outbursts, no sign that she was anything other than supportive. That was her way. Calm, composed, never letting personal feelings disrupt the bigger picture. But behind the formalities, the Queen was human. She knew how important family harmony was. She knew how hard it was to bring two very different worlds together, the institution of royalty and the individuality of a modern couple. The wedding itself was beautiful. St. George's Chapel glowed with music and joy. Meghan and Harry smiled, held hands, and started a new life together. But beneath the surface, the Queen knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. This wedding, like the others before it, reminded her that behind every royal celebration, there are people with feelings, with history, and with challenges that no crown can erase. For Queen Elizabeth II, royal weddings were never just ceremonies or public spectacles. They were moments loaded with symbolism, duty, and often quiet personal emotion. Each royal union reflected the changing times, the shifting expectations of the monarchy, and the deeply human side of a woman who carried a nation's legacy on her shoulders. When Prince William married Catherine Middleton in 2011, the occasion carried the weight of both history and healing. After decades of royal scandals, divorces, and emotional headlines, this wedding felt like a fresh chapter. Kate wasn't from aristocracy, but she had earned the public's respect through quiet strength and grace. The Queen, who had seen decades of royal spouses come and go, reportedly saw something solid and reassuring in her. The day itself was grand as expected, but behind the pageantry, a softer moment stood out. During the carriage procession, Queen Elizabeth was seen leaning over to Prince Philip and speaking quietly. A royal historian later speculated that she might have commented on the couple's choice of transport, the 1902 state landau, instead of the traditional glass coach. That coach held deep memories for the Queen, having carried her on her own wedding day, and also used by Princess Diana. It wasn't disapproval, more a nostalgic note from someone who valued tradition in the smallest of details. Still, William and Kate's wedding was a high point. It was modern, yet respectful of the past. A balance the Queen deeply appreciated. She welcomed Kate into the family with warmth. In many ways, it felt like a nod of approval to a new kind of monarchy, one rooted in stability, not spectacle. But just a few years later, the tone around royal weddings began to shift. In 2018, when Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, the dynamic felt different from the beginning. Meghan brought energy, independence, and a global profile that few royal brides before her had. She was also American, biracial, divorced, and outspoken. Factors that set her apart and generated intense media interest. At first, the Queen extended her usual grace. Meghan was invited to family holidays, public events, and even given the honor of accompanying the Queen on engagements. The gesture signaled support, but the adjustment behind closed doors was more complicated. Tensions reportedly began to surface in the lead-up to the wedding. Meghan had a clear vision for her big day, and that occasionally clashed with long-standing royal protocols. One of the earliest bumps came with her choice of wedding gown, a stunning bright white dress with a long cathedral-length veil. While undeniably beautiful, some within the palace quietly questioned the choice, noting that traditionally, white gowns symbolized first marriages. Meghan had been previously married, and though the Queen never publicly commented, royal insiders believed she might have found the decision a little bold. The Queen was never one to nitpick fashion. For her, it was less about rules and more about symbolism. Meghan's choice wasn't offensive, just different from the quiet deference the Queen herself had always shown to custom. Another point of friction was the now famous tiara moment. Meghan reportedly wanted to wear a particular emerald tiara from the royal collection, but the Royal Jewel Archive, managed by Angela Kelly, the Queen's trusted advisor, had protocols around who could wear what and when. When the request was denied, tensions rose. The Queen was said to have heard of Meghan's reaction and firmly reminded everyone involved that respect for the system was not optional. It wasn't a personal jab, it was about preserving the dignity and order that defined the monarchy. There were other quiet concerns too. Meghan's relationship with her father had become strained, and in the days before the wedding, news broke of staged paparazzi photos and health problems that would prevent him from walking her down the aisle. Queen Elizabeth, who had always valued family unity, reportedly encouraged Meghan to make peace if possible. But it was too late. Prince Charles stepped in to walk her down the aisle instead, a gesture that blended compassion with protocol. Then there was Harry's beard. Though no longer in active military service, Harry wanted to wear his uniform during the ceremony and keep his beard. According to tradition, bearded officers were not permitted to wear dress uniforms. The Queen ultimately allowed it, likely out of affection for her grandson. But these small deviations from royal expectations added to the quiet unease. Through it all, the Queen never raised her voice, nor did she issue formal reprimands. That wasn't her way, but those close to her noticed a sense of weariness. The ceremony was beautiful, the public was thrilled, but behind the scenes, the Queen was reportedly growing tired of the friction. That weariness turned into heartbreak in 2021 when Harry and Meghan gave their infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey. The conversation opened deep wounds, touching on neglect, strained relationships, and accusations of racism within the royal family. For the Queen, a woman who had spent her life believing in discretion and unity, the public airing of family pain was a profound blow. She never responded directly. She didn't issue counter-statements or call press conferences, but she didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. Those close to her said the interview hurt her not just as a monarch, but as a grandmother. She had always had a soft spot for Harry. To see that relationship unravel on global television was something she never imagined. Later that year, Harry and Meghan announced the birth of their daughter and named her Lilibet Diana. Lilibet had been the Queen's childhood nickname, used only by her parents, her sister Margaret, and Prince Philip. It was deeply personal, almost sacred. Harry and Meghan said they had her blessing, but behind the palace gates, some insiders claimed the Queen had not been informed beforehand. She didn't object to the name, but she reportedly felt blindsided by how it was publicly framed. She declined to release an official photo with baby Lilibet. Again, she said nothing, but the choice was telling. By this point, Queen Elizabeth had seen her family go through decades of triumphs and trials. She had watched marriages bloom and break, scandals rise and fall, and tradition constantly wrestle with modern life. Through it all, she had held steady, never explaining, never complaining. Her presence was the thread that held it all together. But in her final years, something shifted. The public saw less of her. She spoke less, appeared less. Some of it was age, but some of it, perhaps, was exhaustion from the noise, the headlines, the relentless questions about what she thought or felt. She had spent a lifetime guarding the line between private emotion and public duty. And in the end, she never crossed it. The Queen never publicly corrected a reporter. She never clapped back at a documentary. She never tweeted or posted or filmed a tell-all. What she did do was remain composed, thoughtful, and grounded in her responsibility. And maybe that was her message all along, that silence can be a form of strength, and that grace, even in private moments, is louder than words.